If we're talking about the land for Greater Israel, Professor Eldad, whom no one would suspect of giving up the eastern side of the Jordan, he would say it's for the sake of the greater land of Israel. The world is changing at a dizzying speed. Empires are falling apart, empires are being built, tyrants are being removed and assassinated. Islam seeking the caliphate is replacing them. Only one thing remains stable: the political behavior of the State of Israel on the world stage. And if we compare this stage to an ocean in which the nations sail, Israel is sailing in it not only without an engine and without sails, and even without oars. In the best case, it occasionally does some kind of swimming movements and gestures. Both according to Israel and the nations of the world, the basic rules of behavior between states don't apply to Israel. Whereas there is recognition of all states of their national historical feelings, their heritage, their religious feelings, their social political needs, the need to make alliances, these rights are not recognized when the Jewish state is concerned. Thus, the army of the Jewish state should not win, and the Oslo agreements, the Second Lebanon War, Operation Cast Lead, these are just some examples of that. It must give up its right and duty to protect its citizens, like in the Gulf War, when we agreed not to respond to the attack from Saddam Hussein by missiles on us. Israel is expected to ignore the arming of the terror organizations at its borders. Only the State of Israel may not determine what its capital is. Its greatest end is to self-determine Israel's capital is Tel Aviv, or to enable presidential candidates to reach in turn he'll move the capital to Jerusalem. Is it only lists shooting on its border for months or on its Negev communities for years, and only Israel's very right to exist is being cast in doubt. This wasn't the case even for Germany or Northern Sudan, which tried to destroy the people in southern Sudan and kill 2.5 million people. Even our national feelings, our pride, our joy at being once again together after so many years of exile and dispersal and suffering and persecution are being ridiculed every day of the year except for one day, Memorial Day. Even our Independence Day is being sullied with their Nakba. Only Israel is being subject to the cliche that a democratic state runs counter to a nation state, and only we are the ones who are forced to make a choice between democracy or a Jewish state, despite the fact that all democracies grew from nation states, and there are very few states that are democracies and are not nation states, but nevertheless Israel must choose to be either democratic or Jewish. England doesn't have to choose. France doesn't have to choose. Even the Arabs, the Arab countries that we are being told are seemingly democracies because they have elections, they don't have to concede their national identity. When we're talking about denying our right to national interests and the behavior on the international scene, not only is a double standard being applied to us, basically a quadruple standard is being applied to us, because where our enemies are concerned, those who deny our very right to exist as a state and who devote their all to destroying us, on them a different set of rules are being applied. They are given privileges by these states. These rights allow them to carry out their desire to destroy Israel, and the Arabs are allowed to invent a history and fabricate national and religious laws and histories that run counter to the truth, only to deny the historical right of the Jewish people to a state. Even worse than that, there are people among us who recognize what the Arabs say, that Zionism was born in sin, but many among us too who recognize that the Arabs are the aggressors oppressors, that they are wrong, that they are demanding a land that is not theirs and a history is not theirs in the name of a fanatical imperialistic ideology. They still recognize the right of the enemy to try again and again to destroy us, because our political behavior cannot but be a recognition of that we must give our enemies the best opening position to destroy us. We give them the right to control Judea and Samaria and Gaza, as if those parts are not part of our homeland, if they are not part of the Balfour Declaration or part of the British Mandate. They are given the right to control Sinai, and there are many who call that this should be done in the Golan Heights too, as if these are not lands that are ours, to which we have a unique historical bond, as if we have not gained control over them in a war of defense. And they recognize the right of the Arabs not to take responsibility for anything they do, including their defeats in wars and their refusal to accept Resolution 181, which is the partition agreement, and their systematic violations of the Camp David agreements and the Oslo agreements. Of course, we cannot ignore the clear anti-Semitic nature of this approach that denies our right to sovereignty and our right to the basic rules and laws in international relations. But I would like to focus first on what that does to us. Whereas Zionism has returned the physical characteristics of sovereignty to the Jewish people, a state, an economy, an army, it has been unable to redeem large parts of the nation from the exile of the soul and to give it the psychological capability to act like a sovereign with other nations with the accepted tools as an equal among equals. The most outstanding characteristic of this exile mentality is the participation of Israel in the international, or the non-participation of the Jewish people on the international scene. But today, this non-participation is being justified with almost ideological reasons, because they say in any case it has no influence on our fate. We are completely dependent on the superpowers, especially America. Another characteristic of this exile mentality is typical Another typical characteristic of our behavior in exile was the idea of messianism. Absurdly enough, circles who are not observant adopted a mystical idea alongside our relinquishment of a sovereign idea. They have an idea that has no legs in reality, and they are brainwashing people to achieve it. It is an idea that has become our raison d'etre, the only idea that receives public legitimacy. I am, of course, talking about the idea of peace. Like every idea or concept that is to be realized at the end of days, failure to attain it is viewed as the reason for all our problems. For it, we give up pieces of our homeland. We agree to settlements and agreements that cannot last. We accept the death or replacement of leaders, as we are seeing now as part of that. We talk about a viable peace forever and ever, of course, because by its very definition, it is disconnected from time and place. It is said to be courageous. We talk about the peace of the brave and about a window of opportunities, as if this is a one-time opportunity to reach paradise lost. In the world of reality, the the window of opportunity is related to the opportunity to apply sovereignty, because this is indeed a one-time opportunity. Sovereignty is the most important thing, and it is on a very high scale in the values of national liberation. This is very important, for example, in the size of the Jewish and Arab populations at a given time or place, or the conditions to receive nationality. All these are of high potential, and the anticipation of them is limited, and they need solutions which are, by nature, are reversible. Not so in the case of sovereignty. Peace has been turned into the one and only aim, and its value, as anyone with eyes in their head can see, is not even worth a mess of pottage. But nevertheless, many of us are willing to give large parts of the homeland, every piece of that land represents the work and toil and tears of generations of our land, thanks to whom we are here. Another characteristic which was typical of the behavior of the Jewish people in exile, especially in the past 200 years with the emancipation and the receipt of equal rights, and that is the adoption of the anti-Semitic ethos. In other words, we blame the suffering imposed on us by our persecutors on ourselves, and Dr. Kenneth Levine speaks about this in his book, This Oslo Syndrome, and he compares it to the battered child syndrome. And he says it is typical of populations that have been under siege for many years. The battered child, on the one hand, justifies the abuse of his parents. He says, I was bad, I misbehaved, and giving that blame, taking blame on himself, gives him the hope that it can be resolved. In other words, if he behaves nicely, the abuse will end, and this gives him an illusion of control over the situation. Similarly, the battered Israeli deludes himself that peace is an immediate option, that it is only up to us if we only enter into this process. In other words, if we withdraw from Judea and Samaria and the Golan, the sun of peace will shine on us. Here too, there is a fantasy that everything is under our control. If we just get rid of all the territories, we will get peace forever, of course. And like in exile, here too the battered Israeli adopts the anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli views that we are attacked with, not in order to conciliate the attackers, but rather from the position of those who are seeking greater morality. That exile of the soul, that unwillingness to accept sovereignty upon us, that was what kept Herzl awake at night, thanks to whom, more than any other person, the Jewish people have a state, because the national desire that Herzl identified, he viewed that as the driving force to extract the Jewish people from the exile. Professor Netanyahu, in his article from 1937 that he wrote about Herzl when he was 27 years old, he analyzes that Herzlian desire and its components. The first component is the faith of the nation in its own strength. Herzl knew, the book is called The Five Fathers of Zionism. Herzl knew that a nation that is submerged in a sense of inferiority, a nation of this nature will never find the strength to realize the act of liberation. Herzl was a great believer in the great strength of the Jewish people, and he attributed its distress to the persecution. If Herzl were living among us today, he would identify this oppression among the people who refuse to see the justice of the Jewish cause. He believed that we must find among ourselves the strength to realize our national aspirations for the coming generations. In order for a nation to receive the rights of sovereignty, Herzl explains it's not enough for others to agree to give us those rights. The nation itself must be taught to accept it, and in order to do so, it must demand those rights. Herzl called this the national courage, and he viewed that as the most important thing. He said, dare. Nations smaller than you have dared to demand a piece of the globe for their nation, and because they dared, because they had the courage to demand it, they received it. Herzl would certainly find it difficult to believe that an existing, flourishing Jewish state with a strong army, international relations, a large Jewish majority, and the ability to control Judea and Samaria would lack the national courage to demand sovereignty over its own heartland. But if we believe in our own, it is not enough to have this national courage, said Herzl. You also need the desire to rule. In other words, sovereignty. That is a precondition for any settlement in the land of Israel. These words were true then, and they are true today. Today, we are physically close to sovereignty over Judea and Samaria and over all of the lands of Israel, far more than in the time of Herzl. But then, as today, the leadership, and I'm not referring only to the elected leaders, perhaps even more so the opinion makers, those who systematically oppress the national feelings of the nation, they are the true obstacle to our national liberation. Herzl said it in this way: we are close to Jerusalem to the same extent that we want Jerusalem. This is a question of the desire beating in our hearts. Our role is to awaken this desire, and if possible, to encourage it. And that desire that Herzl spoke about is the faith in our own strength, the strength of our nation and its value, the national strength to demand sovereignty over our homeland, and the desire to realize it in all those parts that are in our hands. Thank you very much.